Something happened with the SF guys, like some liaison that you had.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
Yeah. So the Village Stability Operations mission set had been going on since 2009 in Afghanistan. We deployed very, very early 2011, like February of 2011. So Village Stability Operations was still relatively new for the campaign, but it was very, very new mission set for the SEAL teams, because that is not something that the SEAL teams really train heavily to do, is that unconventional warfare thing. So it was a new mission set, but Green Berets, in conjunction with their assaults training and things like that, that's their mission set. So when we embedded, we had no real frame of reference for this outside of just lessons learned. So they gave us a liaison who had been doing this for a long time, a squared away Army, I think he was at E7, won't say his name, but we'll call him Pete. So Pete is kind of our liaison for these village stability operations. He's been cultivating some of these relationships with the local elders that we're going to need to know. So he's been basically laying the groundwork for us.
And are you guys going to do a turnover with him? Or is he going to stay on board?
Okay, he was supposed to stay on board. So we meet him at Mazar-e Sharif. We all convoy up to this place. We embed, and then he's basically all has these relationships built out, and we kind of fall in onto these relationships.
Damn, that's pretty nice that they gave you a guy like that.
It's huge.
That had been up there.
Yeah, it was huge. I'm sure that...
And how long had he been on deployment for?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. He was one of those guys that I don't know that he ever really went home. Mm-hmm. It was one of those things with the SF guys specifically, they would go back-to-back tours all the time. And Pete really, really loved it, so I think he was volunteering always to come back. So if I remember correctly, of like the last 3 or 4 years, he had probably spent 3 of them inside Afghanistan. Jack. So he'd been there forever. It was him and his terp that had built out. His interpreter was U.S. citizen, but Afghani born. So they had built out all these relationships for us. We embed with him. We're kind of, working with these relationships, building them up for us now. And he's going out with us on all these operations. And he's just, he's a savage. Like, this guy is a total stud. Definitely a little bit of a wild streak in him too. Like, he would disappear with his terp every now and then, and they would go into the village, and then they would go a little bit past the village, and they would go and do some relationship building or something, and then he would come back, and our platoon chief Dave would have to kind of be like, hey man, what are you said you were going over here, but then you went over there type thing. So he was a super courageous guy, put it that way. Like, not necessarily worried about his own self-preservation in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan. I'll give you an example of that. The first response to a firefight. So these different villages, they know we're there. The Taliban know we're there. So we're going and visiting these villages. We start building some relationships, talk to the village elders, hold these key leader engagements, and then we come back to our base. Well, the Taliban comes then into that village in the next day or two. Sometimes they would just talk with the village elders, and sometimes they would start slapping people around, shooting a couple people, try to prove that they're still in charge type thing. So it was one of those instances where they started to make a ruckus in a neighboring village. We get the call that they're in there, so we respond, and we go push out to basically clear them out of this village and protect the local population. So at the time, we had these big up-armored vehicles. I don't even think that we had our side-by-sides there yet up and running. So we have these big, they're called MAT-Vs. Imagine even larger than a Humvee. They're big off-road vehicles, and they're basically like wheeled tanks. Super capable. That's what we go out on. Pete has got a Iranian-made motorcycle called the Pamir, and he's riding on this Iranian-made motorcycle next to us, actually in front of us, as like the vanguard guiding us to this village that we need to go to. So en route to this village, we're probably about 100 meters away from this village. My vehicle was the lead vehicle at the time, besides Pete leading the charge on his Pamir motorcycle, and our vehicle just starts getting pinged with all these different incoming rounds. And I see Pete just kind of, no joke, dump the bike, jump up, dive behind a berm, and just start getting after it. Talking to him afterwards, he's like, rounds were just snapping all by him on his little motorcycle, and he just dove off into a ditch and started getting after it. He was good dude. Like, he was an awesome SF guy. As we were there for a little bit longer, we started to realize that he also had some issues that probably came from being in theater for too long. He was going, in that mission set, you got to go a little bit indig, a little bit indigenous, because you're living with them. I think Pete went full endage. And we started to get the feeling that some of the times that he would go into these different villages, he would take his terp and he would come back and he would be pretty heavily inebriated. So again, Dave's such a good guy. He really likes Pete, and Pete is a stud. So he's trying to look out for him, and he's talking to him, and he's saying, you can't be doing all that nonsense. And Pete just doesn't take it on board. And it kind of came to a head one night where we have our base is in the village, and then there's two pieces of terrain to the right and the left, and we had our observation post with the heavy machine guns, the grenade launchers, all that stuff up there. So one of our new guys, Chris, new guy with me, radios in and says, hey, there's machine gun fire going on in the wadi. It's the middle of the night. It's like 12 o'clock at night. So good on Chris, because he could have just lit that position up with the 50 cal, but he had enough SA to go, that's a little bit out of the ordinary. It's not being directed at us. So he calls back down to Chief. Chief rallies everybody. We clear through the wadi, and we find out it's Pete and his terp, and they're just hammered. And they're just clacking off rounds in the middle of nowhere. And luckily, as we were clearing up there, we realized what was going on, and no one took any shots when they were shooting everything. So get them, bring them back to our base. They're definitely hammered. And they're sitting on a bench. And Dave's talking to him. And Dave is now, Dave, he's calm until he needs to not be calm. And he's starting to get worked up now because they've had this conversation multiple times. And he's telling them, you can't be doing that. You put everybody at risk. You put yourself at risk. You're damaging the relationship that we have here that we're trying to build out with these village elders by, cracking off your machine guns in the middle of the wadi in the middle of the night. And Pete doesn't like the conversation too much. And he gets up and he goes and attempts to take a swing at Dave. And Dave just drops him with a straight right.
How tall is Dave?
6'6".
Yeah. And he was like a boxer growing up.
Yeah.
And he's a jiu-jitsu player. So he knows how to scrap.
Yeah. Dave hits hard.
Yeah.
Dave hits very hard.
Yeah.
And he
so the dude takes one, and the dude's drunk. And he takes a swing at
Dave. Dave just rocks back, and then as he's coming back, boom, straight right, he's out cold. Like timber, boom, out cold. His terp, who's also inebriated, stands up, and I just kind of shoved him back down on the bench, and he was so gone, he wasn't going to do anything else. But
dude, I wish it was the two piece right there. I wish he cracked that terp too. Pooch off his ass.
The terp, I think, saw what happened and felt like he probably needed to do something, and then realized it wasn't prudent to do that. So Pete's just laid out now. And we're all just kind of sitting here like, Dave just dropped Pete, justifiably just dropped Pete, probably for his own good.
And Pete and Dave both E7s at this
both
juncture.
E7s,
Cool.
yeah. And hey, during the daytime,
they're all good.
They're all good, all good. But you get alcohol involved or Afghani wine or whatever it was, and things escalated. But that night, Dave, after he knocks him out, grabs him, drags him, and puts him in a Connex box and locks the Connex box. And he didn't do it because he was concerned about Pete. He did it because all of his E6s just watched Pete try to take a swing at Chief. Yeah. And he was very concerned about when he went to bed what would happen to Pete. So he puts Pete in the Connex box, and he puts one of the new guys or two of the new guys on watch. Pete wakes up the next morning. He's definitely got a hangover and a sore jaw, but it's all good. But the real lesson here is, for me at least, was Dave could have ruined Pete's career. He could have called back and just said, hey, this guy's a liability. He's insane. He's doing all these things that he shouldn't be doing. You need to fire this dude. You need to take care of him. But that's not what he did. He called up the sergeant major that we were all working for, SF sergeant major, that we were in their battle space. The sergeant major was awesome. He's an ex-CAD guy. He was about Dave's height, 6'8", but big country boy. Last name was Smith. And he calls him up, and he just tells him, he's like, hey, Pete needs to go home, and he needs some time at home to take a breather. And I think Smith was also savvy enough to not ask too many questions. And Dave just goes, he's a good dude. He just needs to go home and take a knee for a little bit. Smith didn't ask any questions besides that. He took Pete back, spent some time with him there at the command, and then brought him back home, sent him back home on a bird, and I think got Pete some much needed R&R and clear his headspace. But because of the way that Dave dealt with that problem with the sergeant major, because he didn't try to make a big deal out of it, because he looked out for his guy, because he realized Pete was a legitimately good dude who had just probably been over there for a lot longer than he should have been over there, that sergeant major loved our platoon. There was not one thing that we asked for that tour that we did not get. And I think the vast majority of the reason was because of how Dave handled that situation and how he didn't try to throw Pete under the bus, about how he just tried to take care of a fellow soldier who needed, maybe a little bit of outside encouragement to go take care of himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a legit example of the escalation of counseling as well. Like he's telling, hey, you can't be doing this, you can't be doing this, oh, you're swinging me, you're getting dropped.